The curator's rooms. First of all, I'm very honored to participate in this conference and to have the chance to present on this topic. Between May 20th and 31st of 1997, Igor Zabel, writer, theorist, and curator at the Moderna galerija in Ljubljana, organized Inexplicable Presence, Curator's Working Place, a 10-day exhibition hosted within the basement room of the Moderna galerija. In this intimate experiment, Zabel prompted the artist with a short anecdote and a photograph as the curatorial point of departure for their own contribution. The small room was used as both the curator's temporary office and exhibition space, a space where Zabel tried a different way of exhibiting and encountering the visitors within, and I quote, the peripheral, ephemeral, accidental, and arbitrary, end of quote, and imagines the possibility of low-budget projects, while interrogating his own role as a curator. In a text from the English compendium of Zabel's art writing, titled Exhibition Strategies in the 1990s, a few examples from Slovenia, he writes that Inexplicable Presence was a way to make concrete some of his reflection about the figure of the curator in contemporary art. He makes a sharp critique of the common understanding of the, and I quote, the curator as the selector, author of the exhibition, interpreter, and co-creator of an exhibition's context, end of quote. Instead, Zabel insists that the, and I quote, curator's role is probably becoming more dialogical. A dialogic relationship signifies that though the curator does not create the work nor defines them, although he or she can have a practical influence on them, he or she can decisively determine the viewpoint which we observe them, emphasizes a particular aspect, and so on, end of quote. The original video documentation of Inexplicable Presence has become an object of fantasy for me. In this intimate mute portrait, the video scans each artwork from the exhibition. Handheld, the camcorder's autofocus catches the reflection from the framed works and wanders around the small room. As one of the few visual archives of this project, the almost silent walkthrough is mesmerizing, only scored by the ambient soundscape of the room's open window. The amateur-feeling document, with its fleeting focus, in-camera effects, and fragmented cuts, accounts more for an intimate experience of the works than a comprehensive or classical overview of the exhibition. Since viewing the video, I immediately assumed that it was Igor Zabel himself that was holding the camera. I inferred that he was filming in a manner only interpretable as accounting for a familiar knowledge of the artwork, a pre-existing relationship with the artists. As a document of an exhibition produced by the curator of said exhibition, his silence felt transgressive, inviting the viewers inside a deeply personal space. This intimate gaze seduced me and my curatorial imagination. It is only much later that I was made aware of my own projection on this archive. In a video call conversation with Urshka Jurman at the Igor Zabel Association for Culture and Theory, she mentioned that it was most likely not Zabel who shot the video. It would have been most likely the same person that was in charge of filming the other exhibitions at the Moderna Gallery. I have to admit that this possibility of Zabel not authoring these moving images was a vulnerable situation. Yet imagining Zabel behind the lens, recognizing his silhouette in the reflection of a framed work, was already part of my interpretation of the intimacy of the exhibition, and I could not unsee him behind this archive. In 2020, the Igor Zabel Association for Culture and Theory published a posthumous catalogue for Inexplicable Presence, after the discovery of the self-designed layout for the planned book. In the foreword, Zabel writes, and I quote, "I sent to several artists a photograph of a certain place in Ljubljana and a text explaining why I chose this place. The letter also includes a description of the project and a personal note explaining to the artist why I had decided to ask him/her to participate in the project. I asked to produce a small work as a response to the picture and the text." Zabel was, end of quote. Zabel was interested in contemplating the possibility of a project which would be based on an extremely private and peripheral starting point, and which could nevertheless develop in a dialogical sense. All of the artists he invited were of personal importance. Reflecting on his central position in the project, he writes, and I quote, "With this, I do not believe that I am appropriating the artist's role. All I want to do is to pose a certain question and problem, and at the same time try not to hide the condition of my own position." End of quote. This last part is what, to me, sets apart this curatorial experiment. It is through the desire of not hiding his own condition that we can appreciate the action of displacing his office from the second floor to the basement of the museum. Zabel furthers this gesture of intimacy by physically working in the exhibition, transforming his office work hours into the publicly accessible viewing time. He states, "I will be present in the room, doing my usual works and perhaps playing some of my favorite music. Of course, I will be ready to talk to any interested visitors." End of quote. This mediation component is an important aspect of the specificity of Inexplicable Presence. Usually, the task of meeting directly the public is not part of the institutional curator's job. The desire to get closer and more intimate, both with the works and the visitors, may make this experiment a very fertile ground for dialogues and conversation. In the 2018 documentary, The Curator's Room, Igor Zabel, How to Make Art Visible, which presented a focus on Inexplicable Presence as a very characteristic and personal project for Zabel, Betsy Zevroch states that by moving his office, Zabel situated himself in the belly of the institution. This framing might refer to the potential of working within the institution in order to rethink its own norm. It calls for interrogating the structure of the museum from the inside. Zabel writes in the catalogue, "As a curator, I find myself more and more attracted by the peripheral, ephemeral, accidental, and arbitrary." He continues, "The whole project, including the publication, will be very inexpensive. I believe, however, that the deliberate use of possibilities of such a project may produce special qualities which cannot be offered by larger or more expensive projects." End of quote. To understand what possibilities Zabel may have been seeking in this inexpensive, small-scale project, we must look at the context that surrounded the 1997 exhibition. The exhibition took place during the European Cultural Month, which was an immense cultural endeavor. Spanning all art forms, the city of Ljubljana hosted the European Commission event with a subversive promise of a European belonging, just a few years after Slovenia's national independence. One of the important things to note is that it attracted an immense cultural tourism, most likely from the former West. As one of the main events of the EMK, the Moderna gallery hosted Epicenter Ljubljana, an exhibition curated by Harald Szeemann. From April 8 to May 31st, 1997, this large international exhibition filled the majority of the exhibition halls of the museum. Igor Spaniol commented in the 2018 documentary that Szeemann's exhibition was very showy, featuring renowned artists and some of the biggest art installations ever exhibited in Ljubljana. To quote Spaniol, Igor felt that this kind of effort might need a counterbalance. To think more deeply about what Spaniol suggests, the counterbalance of Zabel's project to Szeemann's, we can look to the notable difference of scale between the two. Scale of the artworks, scale of the exhibition rooms, scale of the curatorial postures. That same year in 1997, Szeemann had also produced the Fourth Biennial of Lyon, as well as a portion of the Gwangju Biennial. This triad of large-scale exhibition is notably discussed by Szeemann in an interview conducted by Cecilia Lavelli and Franklin Sermons, entitled Curator as Author, From Ljubljana to Lyon to Gwangju. The conversation was published in the Flash Art International in the summer of 1997. Performing his flamboyant character with convoluted insight into his exhibition-making process, Szeemann makes two declarations that stands out. He states that the invitation he received from Zdenka Badovinac to curate the exhibition Epicenter Ljubljana was similar to a carte blanche, which led to, and I quote him, a new freedom in curating. He furthers this point in his catalogue essay. While describing the exhibition of 8 artists who, and I quote, actually have little in common, end of quote, he states that, and I quote, it is precisely here that this exhibition has an opportunity. It is an epicenter. That is a new type of group exhibition, trans-age, trans-erotic, trans-energetic, end of quote. In the interview, he also adds trans-everything. The second outstanding declaration and concluding response of the interview comes after a question from Cecilia Lavelli. She asks, and I quote, after all of these years, how do you feel about curating? Szeemann's answer, I am not a curator, I am an author. This refusal of the curatorial role is very telling. It seems like the freedom that Szeemann is working from projects his position beyond the curator to a more omnipotent author, surpassing the condition of a role he is still, nevertheless, benefiting from. Szeemann declares sovereignty. Here lies the difference in scale between the synchronous pair of exhibition. If Epicenter Ljubljana remains a space of freedom for Szeemann to surpass his own title, it is far from the self-reflective position, intimacy, and accountability that Zabel is looking for in the curator's working place. As a response to Harald Szeemann's refusal of claiming the position of the curator, I would like to pair another quote from Igor Zabel, text exhibiting exhibition strategies in the 1990s, and I quote, the emphatically personal or even arbitrary nature of the work, often characteristic of the contemporary curator, is actually the deconstruction of the position of power and selection. Opening parenthesis. Speaking about deconstruction, I am not trying to say that curators can eliminate their role as the instance of power in the institutional system of the world of art, but rather that they reveal this role clearly and no longer present it as something objective or natural. End of quote. Oh, sorry. To conclude my presentation, I would like to respond to a passage of Igor Zabel's writing concerning the experiment that was the Inexplicable Presence exhibition. And I quote, I see only one danger, he writes. Sometimes people are more interested in the unconventional way of presentation than in the works themselves. Actually, such an approach is exactly the opposite of what I wanted to achieve, end of quote. I must admit that I've done just that, leaving the works aside to focus on the structure of his project. But I must also disagree. since it is exactly Zabel's unconventional approach that gives me the model to carry forward my own peripheral and low-budget projects and to continue to interrogate the figure of the curator. Thank you.